Okay, welcome again. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm Dr. Amanda Dye. I'm Director of Advising and Programs at Beyond Barnard and Health Professions Advisor at Barnard. I am super excited to welcome back a bunch of alums who are at various stages of their medical education and to have them here to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to go to medical school, but also a little bit about how they prepared, how they became sure about careers in the health professions, all of those sorts of things. I'm going to add a link in the chat if I can find it. Here we go. To everyone, just so that you can see the list of panelists and their years and medical school affiliations. So that's there at the link for anybody who wants to take a look. But we're going to get started by having our panelists just say hi and tell you where they're studying, what year they are for the fourth years, if you don't mind including the residency programs you're applying for, the kinds of residencies. We would love that. And Julia, you are right next to me on my screen. So will you get us started?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Julia Barron, and I'm a second year at Thomas Jefferson University, Sidney Kimmel Medical College.
Awesome. Emma, how about you next?
Hi, my name is Emma Breber, and I'm an M1 at Mount Sinai Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai.
Awesome. Hajira?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hajira, and I'm currently a fourth year at Cornell, and I'm applying into emergency medicine.
Awesome. Jasmine?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. I'm an M1 at UPenn Perelman School of Medicine.
Michaela?
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm a first year at Weill Cornell.
Carolina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolina. I'm from the class of 22, and I'm currently a first-year medical student in the MD PhD program at the University of Rochester School of Medicine. Long name.
Thank you. Naya, how about you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Naya Sandiford, a second year at Sidney Kimmel Medical College of Thomas Jefferson University.
Awesome. Ariana?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariana. I'm a first-year medical student at Albert Einstein College of Medicine.
Yay. Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm a fourth year at USIS, which is the Uniformed Services University, aka the Military's Medical School. And I'm applying to neurology.
Thank you. Yael.
Hey everyone, I'm class of 2017 at Barnard, and I am a fourth year at GW in DC, and I just applied OBGYN.
Yay. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a fourth year at Albert Einstein, and I'm applying right now into pediatrics residencies.
Yay, awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to get us started. Any of you who want to jump in on questions are welcome. We don't need to feel like everybody has to answer every single one. But I want to get started talking about the ways that you all figured out that medicine was right for you. I think that's a huge, huge question for so many people. Tell us, anybody who wants to, about the experiences you had either in college or afterwards that really informed your decision to apply to medical school, to have a career as a physician.
I'm happy to go first. I would say the main experience I think that proved to me that medicine was, the right course was my EMS experience in undergrad. I did Columbia EMS for all 4 years, and it was the best time ever. So if anybody is interested in that, I would highly recommend it. It's really just get hands-on experience with medicine, just taking care of patients, forging that provider-patient relationship. And I thought that was a very helpful thing to be able to do. So.
Awesome, thank you.
I can also talk a little bit about something that's not super like medical, but did help kind of influence why I wanted to go into medicine. I did a lot of like volunteer outreach stuff, like with Housing Equity Project, if anyone knows about that group, and with like housing food insecurity things. And I think that really made me think about, you know, like what kind of impact I want to have on people and like maybe where I can play a role in something structural, perhaps. And I think like also working with people, but also having some kind of like place where I can help change things structurally, institutionally. I feel like all of that kind of came together in my mind when I was thinking of medicine and also like service work and like my interest in science. And I think doing a lot of volunteer work was so great for like meeting people and also thinking about like social impact.
Awesome. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, two things that come to mind for me. One is peer health exchange, which I did while at Barnard. And that was a great experience learning just how to talk about health and how to counsel people, in this case, high schoolers, on their health. And I learned that I loved talking to people about their health and how they go about health related decision making. And obviously, I'm going into pediatrics, so working with that population was super meaningful. And then also, I took 2 gap years between med school and college, and I did clinical research at a hospital in New York. And I think that was the major thing that exposed me to a clinical setting and allowed me to see, oh, I actually like the flow of a day in clinic, seeing patients. I like the clinical tasks. Because before that, I had just kind of been exposed to like science, more sciencey things. And I think getting time in an actual clinical medical setting helped make the decision more concrete that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I would kind of second what Sarah said. I also did clinical research stuff for like 2 years after college. I worked in the NICU at Cornell. And it was like so impactful for me to like actually have kind of firsthand experience in the hospital. I also, previous to that, had an experience like on a different research study that was like not really clinical at all, that I really didn't like. So there was a huge benefit for me in like understanding what kind of life I want to have and how I felt doing kind of more medical work and less medical work. So that ended up being a really helpful experience as kind of like a negative example of just like, okay, I've tried this and I don't like it. And so then I could kind of go forward with that knowledge too.
It's a very good point. Sometimes the things that you don't like are as useful in figuring out your path as the things that you do. Awesome. Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, I can go. So I had a little bit of a circuitous path. I was a psych major at Barnard and actually did fashion throughout my undergrad. And I think like my path really highlights that like the opportunities Barnard gave me and gives you as a student. Like I very well could have continued on in fashion. I had really successful internships, but when I decided to do medicine, like I actually scheduled meetings with Dr. Dye. She like read my personal statement. And I was living in Boston at the time. So I think it really speaks to the support and that you definitely don't need to know what you want to do in college. I think at a liberal arts school, there's so many opportunities. And I actually, to echo what the past few people said, I did 4 years in between college and med school, and I did 2 years of cancer research in Boston, which was really like reinforcing for me in terms of what I want to do with my career and what kind of impact I want to have.
Awesome. So speaking of your time at Barnard, I'd love to know how well you feel like your academic background prepared you for the challenges that you've started to face in medical school. How would you compare your preparedness to other folks who are in your classes? What can future students, future med school attendees expect after Barnard in a medical education?
I can go. I felt very, very well prepared by Barnard in terms of like the workload. And I also like in college was doing cheer. So like I had practice a couple times a week, games, stuff like that. And I think like being like a student athlete also really helped prepare me for like the workload, and like learning how to manage my time while in college really helped when I got here. And for me, at least, it felt like the transition from like high school to like Barnard was harder than the transition from like Barnard to med school, if that makes sense. I think because in college you also start to get kind of your study habits and you like learn what works for you, and you kind of get a little bit of that with like studying for the MCAT as well. But I felt really well prepared, at least for my first year. I'm only first year, so
I can second that. I felt pretty well prepared compared to my peers. I find that academically I tend to fall in midline, like I'm pretty like in line with my expectations and whatnot. The only surprising thing about medical school for me was sort of this elevated level of professionalism that's expected from you. So Barnard being a very small liberal arts college, like a lot of the professors are very personable and very understanding. And they're happy to like make exceptions for you if you're sick or if you have some sort of extenuating circumstance, or even if you just ask nicely. What I was not prepared for was like the level of professionalism that is expected of you. So that was a little bit of an adjustment for me, but nothing that I couldn't handle. So.
I would say medical school was really hard for me because I took 4 years off. So I think I like forgot how hard I worked in college. And like I worked so hard at Barnard, but then taking 4 years off was a really nice break. So it was a little bit of a rude awakening when I started, but you honestly, you fall into it quickly. Thankfully, most medical schools are pass fail for preclinical. I can't speak to everyone, but for me, that was like hugely helpful for my mental health because unlike college, where you really can learn all the info for a test, you realize in medical school, you're never going to know everything. And you just got to keep studying and keep reviewing. But I think like those same skills that I learned at Barnard really have paid off. And I think it's like the same tools of being hardworking and putting time into it and being curious. I think being curious was always a value at Barnard that I feel like was really valued and emphasized in all my courses.
I can definitely echo what Yael said. So I took 3 years off before going to med school. It definitely was an adjustment at first, but like everyone has said, you get into the rhythm of studying. In terms of being prepared for med school, I definitely felt very prepared and in comparison with my peers. And I think the hardest part about medical school in general is just like getting accepted. And Barnard definitely helped me with that, with pre-health advising appointments, writing center appointments. Yeah, Barnard created loads of opportunities for me as I entered med school.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what everyone said, I think it really just prepares you for the skills and not the material. Like I personally have never used orgo or physics or any of that stuff. So it's more about like the discipline that's very important because I think, for example, in college, you could get away with cramming, but for medical school, it's like if you really don't keep up with the material, you will fall behind. You have to be very proactive. If you are struggling, you need to seek help. I do think it's like a little bit less leeway, but I think it's just like building good study habits now will only prepare you better for the future. And in getting used to using outside resources, especially once you get to your clinical portion of it, it's not really lecture slides when you're taking your shelf exams. You need to be able to use resources, know how to prioritize your time and what resources you want to use to be able to do well on your exams.
Awesome. And actually, to go back to something Carolina said, I'd love to hear something that was surprising to you when you started your medical education. What's something that you didn't expect about medical school that you've since learned?
I think a surprising thing for me was realizing how much time I actually had. Especially in the pre-clerkship period, where you're just going to classes and you're doing a lot of independent learning, you have tons of flexibility to do things that you love and enjoy and really prioritize your wellness. I would emphasize that. I think it's much harder when you get to the clerkship phase, where you're having to rotate at the hospital. And then on top of that, having to make time afterwards to study. I think there's so much more flexibility and room to just do things that you enjoy, as opposed to trying to build a CV, which is what I feel like I focused on more so in undergrad. Yeah.
I would like to echo that. I think for the first few weeks, it was actually interesting for me to like get used to that pass fail situation as much as I really liked it. Of course, like I love that. you know, like going to a place like Barnard, like I know that there was like a lot of just like pressure that I would put on myself, or just like I was starting medical school, I like learned that I had to unlearn like how to not emphasize like grades and stuff like that and like equate that to my value. And I feel like once I like started getting used to that, starting being like, okay, like I'm just trying to pass, I have been able to also enjoy myself a lot. Like I would say like the past like 3 or 4 weeks, like recently, like now that I feel like I'm more like in my groove and like have more of a routine, like I know how I'm studying, etc. Like I've honestly been having a lot of fun, and I've been also working more on like my professional development. And now that I feel better about like assessments, now I can focus on research and shadowing, etc. So that was something that was surprising to me at first, but something that I'm definitely like trying to transition out of.
Yeah.
Oh, oh.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I guess something that was very surprising to me was how exciting or like enjoyable school was. Like I think you work so hard to get to the point to finally get to medical school, and now you're finally like learning the things that you've always been curious about. And I've really have found joy in every kind of thread, every organ system that we've learned. So that's been really exciting. And then I would also say that during my time at Barnard, I was very much focused on like kind of checking off boxes and doing the things that I needed to do to get to the next step. And so now that I'm here, I feel like I'm really able to explore my passions and like do the things that I was, writing about like in my essays and things like that, like volunteering in communities that I care about, and really just getting to explore all the different facets of medicine that are available to you. So that's been really exciting.
I think I was surprised by the level of support. And I think that some of this is school specific, and I think some of it is like pretty universal. But like Barnard feels like a small school and like there's lots of support, but medical school classes are like much smaller than Barnard classes are. And at least in my experience, there's like it feels like way more support, even though it's way smaller of a class. So I think that there's a different feeling of like the deans know you because there's 120 people that they have to know in each class. And so like that's not that many people. And so they'll get to know you even like as an M1, and also the feeling of like they don't want you to fail, like as opposed to the feeling of like weeding out classes, which Barnard doesn't really have in the same way, but like the feeling of like they're kind of trying to push you so that you self-select out. At medical school, they've like invested a lot of energy in you just by accepting you and wanting you there. They really want you to succeed. Like that's a spot in their class. Like they want you to do really well. So the kind of level of support and the level of attention on us was surprising to me, but has been really lovely.
Oh, I would say on a more, I guess, well, it's not negative, but I would say kind of how cliquey medical school is. I mean, I love my classmates, don't get me wrong, but I do think like there's very distinct groups, and I think that's something I've heard across like medical schools and like postgraduate schools that sometimes kind of comes like a shock because it's kind of like almost feels like high school. But I do love my classmates, don't get me wrong, but I think we all contribute to that culture, but I do feel like medical school is kind of cliquey.
I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So my question actually comes back to some of the things that you all were just talking about. What do you do outside of classes? What are the kinds of things that you spend time on, whether it's volunteering or other activities that are sort of not necessarily strictly part of your curriculum? What does your actual day look like?
I guess I can start. If I'm being completely honest, at my school, the first portion of your first year of medical school is considered to be one of the most strenuous, academically. And so for a lot of students in my class, including myself, we've actually not been doing a lot outside of school. A lot of it is just making sure that you're studying enough while still like taking care of yourself and like, eating, sleeping, getting your exercise in, talking to friends, etc. So if I'm gonna be completely honest, I haven't had a lot of time to engage in my hobbies, but the notion is that like after Thanksgiving, usually the curriculum starts to settle down and, hopefully I'll have more time to do some volunteering then.
I think oh, you go, Jasmine.
Oh, thank you. I was gonna say, maybe on the flip side, I feel like I have been trying to like ease into things and not join too many groups or do too many things, but I have been sort of seeking out the opportunities that I knew right away that I'd be interested in, whether that was a free clinic or, street medicine or something like that. But I also feel very lucky. Philly is new to me, but I've been able to really like explore with I got put into like a learning team, which I know some schools do, which is like a random group of people, but I happen to be obsessed with everyone in my learning team. It's a little bit disgusting. We like hang out all the time. We already had a Friendsgiving. So it's like totally possible for us at least to have a life right now, even though like weekend before exams we're kind of locked in. And now that kind of approaching break and I'm in a lull, I'm trying to incorporate some of my other hobbies back in that aren't just, school related. But I have been able to have a social life, which I didn't really expect, which has been really nice.
Awesome.
I can go. In terms of like school stuff, like extracurriculars that I'm doing, we have a community clinic, which is like a free clinic for uninsured individuals. And so I'm on the board for that, and I'm a referrals coordinator. So if somebody comes to the clinic and they need a referral to cardiology, I would help like put that referral in place and help get them their appointment, help schedule their referral appointment. And then I'm also on the board for HPrep, which is a 10-week pathway program for high school students. I'm the co-president for HPrep and the president for SMEP, which is like a pathway program for middle school students. And then like outside of school, I like to tumble. So I did cheer throughout like high school and college. I still try to go to tumbling classes at Chelsea Piers like when I can. So yeah.
That's awesome. Crosstown.
I wanted to add that I think there's definitely like seasons in life for different things. And I think medical school I found particularly challenging in that. So the first 2 years are similar to college in that I was going to class, there was time for extracurriculars, but because it was only like actually a year and a half, you had to get involved in activities really quickly. So I actually was also president of our student run clinic, like before I had even really volunteered there, which felt funny, but you honestly pick it up, like any activity you do, you get really involved in. And then the third and fourth years, I did not have a lot of time outside of rotations. Like on your surgery rotation, you could be waking up in the 4s and getting home, and then you have to study. So it's very hard to do extra things like for school, but I did try to prioritize like my well-being. So always having like dinner with friends. I actually got a dog my first year of med school, which highly recommend. And I also volunteer on the weekend at a local community abortion clinic in Virginia. So I think there's ways to sprinkle in what you want to do, but it's definitely different than college and that you might not have time for like a 2-hour meeting every week.
And something that I think is really different from college is in college, you join clubs and you're a part of these clubs and you do these longitudinal experiences with clubs. And in med school, there are organizations that have executive boards that host events, but there's not so much club membership. So every club on campus sends all of their event invites to everybody on campus, and you can just kind of pick and choose what events you want to go to, as opposed to that more formalized membership that I think is like more typical in college. So it's nice. You can kind of pick and choose what you feel inspired or motivated by at any time. And again, as so many people have said, there are seasons. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities in med school to do things that are like interesting to you, even if it's not what you are going to do for your specialty. So like I'm doing pediatrics, but I'm an intern for this initiative at Einstein where we do free cervical cancer screenings for people in the community because I really loved OBGYN, not to go into forever, but there are lots of opportunities to do things that you're passionate about. And there are also opportunities to do non-medical clubs. Like I'm president of like the dance club at Einstein, and we do events like once in a while, but there are still those non-medical clubs. Definitely less so than in college, but they're there.
Yeah, I guess I could speak also from a fourth year experience. Personally, I think fourth year is the best year. You have the most free time, but I think that's also school dependent because some schools have required fourth year rotations, but at Cornell, we don't. So honestly, this year is like you just kind of do whatever you want as long as you're doing your interviews. So for me personally, I've done a lot of traveling this year. Like I went to New Orleans, Puerto Rico, Chicago, Seattle twice. So I do a lot of traveling. I would say some promo for Cornell. I feel like there's great work-life balance here. And I think even in our first year and a half, we had a lot of free times. I never felt like school has stopped me from doing the things that I've wanted to do. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to open it up now for questions. You can pop questions in the chat, use the hand raise thing. You know how to use Zoom. Everybody's here. Oh, we've got the first question. Okay, so do you do research while in medical school, and how are you able to balance that with schoolwork and clerkships?
It's a fine balance indeed. Yes, I think it's important to consider what else you have on your plate before you sign up to do any sort of research, but research is definitely a very important part of your training and an important part eventually of your residency applications. Some residency programs prioritize research much more than others. It gets you points on your application. So yes, it's definitely a part of med school. Honestly, something to look forward to. I think it's super fun because you can do any type of research. If you want to focus more on clinical side, you can do case reports. But yeah, it takes definitely a lot of initiative to find those projects. But yes.
So at Cornell, we actually have something called AOC, so areas of concentration. So it's like mandatory 6 months of research. And I actually just came back from our fair for all of the research projects that they had. They gave us some merch. But different departments like had tables, and we got to go around and see like what other students' AOC projects were. And then so we can kind of start seeing what we're interested in. And then a lot of students will do research between their first and second year. So the summer between first year and second year, people will do research. So right now I'm trying to figure out like what specialty I want to do research in, and then like starting to like get my feet wet and reaching out to people. But yeah, that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, I'll also add that as someone who did like a lot of wet lab research before medical school, I feel like it's much more the norm to do like I guess unless you're MD PhD, but to do like more like dry lab data analysis clinical things, which can be less time consuming than like basic science research. And also I feel like once you get to med school, it's a little easier to find research opportunities because people are a lot more receptive to taking you on, and it's a little like cold emailing is a little bit less scary because people will actually be excited to have you on board.
I can
Awesome.
echo.
Go ahead.
I
Go
can
ahead, Julie.
echo Jasmine on that. There are loads of research opportunities in med school, so you sort of have to be selective on what you pursue, because sometimes when you say yes to too many things, it can be too much. But from a second year perspective, research is definitely doable. I'm currently on like a couple of different projects in surgery, but also we have like a similar concentration track for research. So I'm in the humanities track, doing a project looking at the intersection between dance and medical education. So there's a ton of different projects that you can do in med school.
Awesome. Alana, I think your hand was up next. So do you want to ask your question?
Okay, thank you. My question is directly for Carolina for your MD PhD. I'm also interested in applying MD PhD, and I was and I feel like there's not a lot of people that I see, which is fine. And I just wanted to ask a specific question, I guess. Did you apply to both MD and MD PhD? And if you did, how was the committee letter process for you through that? If you did use that, did you use it for both, or did you find that the process was difficult applying for both if you did? Or that's just a specific question, but I was curious if you have an answer to that.
Yeah, great question. I guess the application process makes it really easy to apply to both programs because it's really just It's really just like a checkbox sort of thing where there's additional application materials that you have to submit to MD PhD programs. But for most of these applications, you're just checking a box that says, I would like to also be considered for regular MD programs as well. So you're really not doing 2 applications to one school. It's like one application that includes the same committee letter type of ordeal. So it's really not a lot of extra work except writing the extra essays, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you still use the committee letter for those. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That helped a lot. Thank you.
Next question here is for those who took a gap year, which is almost everybody. Can you talk a little bit about what you did and how you found the opportunities that you pursued?
Yeah, I can start off. I believe I utilized the Barnard Alumni Network, I think. And I just had a couple of conversations with some alumni, and one in particular connected me with at the time he was like the COO of a new kind of health tech startup in New York City. And I was able to meet with him and have a couple conversations, and we basically created my role at the health tech startup, which was really cool. And so yeah, the using the Barnard Alumni Network was a really great tool. And I feel like I got such a great amount of experience from that job itself. I don't recommend working there anymore, but it definitely was a great experience for the time in which I was there for sure.
Yeah, I can go next. I took 2 gap years. And essentially what I did was continued the work that I had started part-time while I was at Barnard. So I had started working at an anesthesia company, as an anesthesia assistant when I became full-time after graduating. I also took on more like roles and responsibilities as a clinical ops, like I guess a little bit more like office based. So I was able to kind of do both, like seeing behind the scenes of like a procedure and then also being there for procedures. And then I guess also like to plug, I actually find that job through Handshake. So yeah, I did follow like what I had already done some in college, but I did find that opportunity through Handshake.
I just took 1 year between undergrad and med school, so it was a bit of a like you're applying to med school and also like just doing your gap year thing, which makes it a little bit, I worked in my lab from undergrad, and they like kept me out of the lab tech, which was really nice for a lot of reasons because they gave me a lot of flexibility. So if I needed to just like go to an interview, they were like, yeah, that's fine. And like that was really nice. So for like 1 gap year people, it is nice having a job with a lot of flexibility while you're applying.
Yeah, I highly recommend taking a gap year. I initially didn't. I applied twice. So I applied coming right out of college and did not get in. And then I applied a second time after taking the gap years. And at the time it was like very frustrating because I felt like, I know I want to do this. Why don't they know that I want to do this? But I felt that like after taking the gap years, I gained a lot of like not just experience, but also like color on like I had more evidence that I could use to like make a compelling argument to other people about how I knew these things about myself that I already knew, but like they didn't know because they don't know me. So I definitely recommend taking gap years. I also recommend, so as I said, I did 2 different kind of gap year jobs and I really liked the second one. For that one, I applied super broadly. Like I applied to a bunch of different places, just kind of anything I could find. I went to like all of the different hospitals have their own. I was applying in New York, so I wanted to stay here. So they all have their own little different application setting, and then I basically just applied to all of them. Um, and that worked well for me. I got interviews at different places, and then I kind of got to pick the one that was best for me. If you're trying to stay in New York specifically, some of those places they won't really have a job description. You're just kind of applying into the ether, or like applying to like clinical trials office, and they won't tell you exactly what kind of study that you're working on. I still recommend applying and then kind of seeing where the road takes you, because there might be a really good opportunity at the end, and it is just kind of a numbers game if you're not going based on an experience that you kind of already had in undergrad, which if you did, that's awesome. But if you're doing something new, I would say apply really broadly.
The next question that we have, oh, Julia, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I will just say, so I took 3 gap years and I ended up doing this research program. It's called the CHOP Research Institute Summer Scholars Program. And I think that was like a really big transitional moment for me where I decided to apply to medical school. And that ultimately led me to a full-time job. And I think 3 years was perfect for me because I was able to get professional experience. I was able to work on a clinical team and understand like clinical settings and dynamics, which has helped in med school. So if you're considering doing a gap year, I recommend trying to find an environment that has something similar like that.
And I want to add a plug for all you that like Barnard specifically, like you're at a school where literally they have alumni everywhere. Like so I did 4 gap years and I did this great research program in Mass General. And I literally got the interview because my friend from Barnard worked there before she went to medical school. So I think like they're always going to want these types of jobs and even residency when you have a connection and you know someone. It really goes a long way. And they ended up interviewing me after they had filled all the positions and they made like an extra spot. So I would definitely try to keep in touch with people, reach out to I don't know because I wasn't pre-med at Barnard, but I'm sure they have a list of like where people are at and you can reach out to people.
Awesome. I want to keep it moving because there are a billion questions. The next one is about the MCAT. How did you prepare? How did you balance preparing for the MCAT with doing other things, working, studying, otherwise?
I think being realistic about what you can do when you're studying for the MCAT will set you up for a successful, less miserable experience. So like I knew I was going to be working full time at my research job in my gap years. So like I couldn't drop everything and study for the MCAT in a month or two. I knew I had to have like a longer period of studying because I could do fewer hours per day. And I think just by like setting yourself up for a structure that's going to work with the other things in your life, like vying for your time, will help you because you won't feel like you're like pushing against this deadline that is just unrealistic to do. I think if you can swing a prep course, that's a good place to start. And then just like a little bit every day. I think for me, that was a little different than Barnard. I wasn't necessarily putting in a certain number of hours of work every single day, but the way you study for the MCAT is actually the most similar to how you will study in med school. So it's a learning curve to study for it, but it is really valuable information. And I have some friends where in studying for the MCAT, they realize like, oh, I do not want to do this. And some people that were like, this way of studying works for me, and that's great. But just know that preparing for that exam is similar to what you'll have to do a lot of times in med school for various exams.
Something that was, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, something that was really helpful for me that I like live and die by is I feel like practice questions are like, for me, we're like king for the MCAT, and there's so many free practice resources, but also like paid ones, but they're totally worth it because I think part of the challenge of the MCAT is just understanding the exam structure and the types of questions they're asking. And I think for me, that was like really important, as well as just consistently, like even if I didn't have a ton of time because of my other obligations, just having consistency and doing like to echo a little bit every day and just building that as a habit so that you can work in all of like the immense information that you have to learn.
Just speaking about the 3 things that I did that made me successful on the MCAT. First one includes UWorld. I did like 20 to 40 practice questions every single day. And the ones that I got wrong, I made a spreadsheet of like the topic of that I got wrong and then why I got it wrong. And I also did that for practice exams as well. And oh, the second thing is I practice cars every single day. I think I did UWorld cars, and then I think there was this website called Jack Weston. Is that it? Okay. Yeah, I did that every day as well. Yeah, and the third thing was that Excel spreadsheet. But I think those three things are really what changed the score for me.
Yeah, and I would say a piece of advice is don't take the test unless you're scoring where you want to be on practice exams. That is so important. I know sometimes like we could have a deadline in our head about like when we want to take it by, and then you just want to take it. But the worst thing you could do is take it and then not get what you wanted and then have to put yourself through that like emotional stress again. Because studies have shown like most people score like ±3 from what they're getting on their practice scores. So truly, if you're not scoring where you want, I would really advise to wait.
Yes, to that. I thought I could study for the MCAT by myself and didn't do well on it the first time and ended up doing an incredible course called the MCAT Guy, David Elson, that I learned about through my friend at Barnard. He is local to New York, but he does classes via Zoom. I'm happy to write his name. My score went up 11 points, which is insane. And on multiple interviews, people were like, wow, that's the biggest jump we've ever seen. So that's all to say, like, I took it twice, and medical schools really liked that it was like an upward progression. So do what works best for you. I just realized that I needed the structure of a course.
Yeah, just briefly before, because I know we have to move on. I did Anki and I studied while I was in school. Anki is something that a lot of med students use. So kind of like someone else was saying, it's a good trial run. Not all med students use it, but it is a good kind of trial run for a way that you might study in med school. And for me, it was an accessible way to study every day, even if I didn't have like a whole block of time to sit down. I knew I could kind of just finish my Anki for the day, and at least I was staying engaged with the material.
Awesome. And actually, I think the next question is sort of related. It's about how do you keep up with the coursework in medical school? What are the tips and tricks that you have for folks who are looking toward the future?
Consistency, just a little bit every day. Like really be putting your hours in every day. Maybe at the beginning of a course, that's like 2 to 4 hours a day. And then the week of the exam, it's like, I don't remember how much I was doing in preclinical, but more than that. But really, really, really like you have to work at it a little bit every day. You cannot cram. Yeah, that's all.
I absolutely second that. I was kind of guilty of cramming a little bit in college, and I mainly got away with it, but like you cannot get away with it in medical school. You have to do a little bit every day. And the other piece of advice I would offer is regarding just the volume of information that you have to know. It's not like college or high school where you will feel prepared for the exam when the exam comes around. People like to say that in college you study until you're prepared, and in medical school you study until you run out of time. So you're never going to be able to know 100% of the information on these exams because the volume of information is just so high. So a really important skill to learn is just like knowing which areas you need to work most on to get like the most gain out of, studying that topic versus like which things you're already good at. So you can like maybe skip a review because you're already kind of good at that. So yeah, just like managing your expectations on like what you expect yourself to be able to study versus like what can be put aside for now. It was really important for me.
And just to add on to that, I would say doing practice questions too. So I know at our school we get access to ScholarRx, which is like a question bank system. And I think just reiterating or like kind of solidifying what you're going over throughout the week with questions at the end of the week is just a really good way to just check in with yourself to make sure you know that, okay, I know what we've kind of covered over the week and stuff like that. And I think it also really depends on the school. Like we have weekly quizzes on Fridays. So that's a way for us to kind of check our knowledge, and the quizzes don't really matter. So that's also a way for us to kind of figure out what is it that we need to prioritize when exam week does come around. So.
Awesome. What's something you wish you knew as a pre-med student at Barnard? Anything you wish you did differently?
One thing I have to say is I think in undergrad, there is a big perception that if you are not doing well naturally and easily in all of your pre-med coursework, you are not supposed to be a doctor or a PA or pursue a medical career. And that is not true. I will tell you, there's so much more to it than that. And I remember sitting in this session when I was like a third third year junior in college and being like, I can't do it because I didn't do very well in orgo, and like that means something. And so like if you believe that you will be a good healthcare professional, you will. And like please, please, please do not let an orgo grade or a physics grade or something like that like tell you that you can't do it. So like that's like the thing I wish I knew. Like you can get to medical school or a health profession, like no one thing that's like a red flag is going to keep you from doing that if you believe that you would be good in that profession. That's all.
I wish I studied abroad. I mean, it was also like COVID kind of like took that away also, but like if you have the opportunity to study abroad, I would do that. And I think when I came into Barnard, I was like, oh, I have to like double up in science. Like I have to do all these things. And I want to take a gap year. Like I can't study abroad if I don't want to take a gap year. And I just like really wish that I had taken the opportunity to study abroad while in college.
I think something about this path, which I love, because you always like, we know what our future is. We have really exciting job prospects after hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, is that it's very easy to constantly be thinking about the next step. Like, oh my gosh, when I get into medical school, I'm going to be so happy. Oh my God, when I pass step one, life is going to be great. And now it's like when I hear back from residency, but so much of this process, and kind of to echo what Sarah said, is literally about like hard work, survival, enjoy the process, and it's years long. So don't always be thinking about the next step. And oh, sorry, dog is, but yeah, that's definitely, and I really look back at college and I'm appreciative for all the things I did for fun for myself, all the Saturday nights I went out instead of studying, and it will be okay in the end.
It's true, you don't get that time back. What should folks who are thinking about medical school in the future know about financial aid? What are like, big things to keep in mind, without disclosing any individual financial information?
So I was actually typing a response to this right now. So I'm gonna go. So like some schools will have like tuition free, like I'm sure you've heard of like NYU or like Einstein. I think John Hopkins also just like had something regarding like the tuition free or like full cost of attendance for need-based students. I would say to keep in mind tuition free does not mean free, because there's still like rent and like food and like you need money to like live. So keep that in mind. Some schools have like pretty good like need-based financial aid. Like I know Sinai has like pretty good aid, like pretty good need-based aid where they'll like cap your loan for, if you need based, they'll like cap your loans at a certain amount. I think it was $75,000. For like over the 4 years, like you'll have like you'll graduate with $75,000 in debt, which is like really good compared to the average. Cornell has a debt-free initiative. So their goal is to like have you leave debt-free. So if your EFC essentially is 0, then you won't have any debt when you graduate. I won't say that everybody graduates with no debt, because it's like a calculation based off like your family contribution, and then like they kind of like make up the difference so that you won't graduate with debt. But yeah, the majority of students, I would say though, are graduating with like a lot of debt. Like financial aid for like med school is not nearly as like encompassing as I would say it is for undergrad. But yeah.
Yeah, I will say I'm very jealous. GW is very, very expensive. And like, to be totally transparent, I'm in a lot of debt, but all of my friends are too. And you start to learn like it feels uncomfortable, but you just live your life with the debt and you're going to pay it back. Like you're going to have a great career, you're going to pay it back over time, but it's definitely an uncomfortable feeling and you get used to it, sadly. But I think it's par for the course unless you're lucky enough to go to a school. And hopefully that's going to be the trend, that more and more schools will become free. But I think in this process, also beggars can't be choosers, and you don't always control where you go to school and what the financial aid will look like. I will also say some medical schools like GW, which I find very silly, is so I'm 30, I'm married, like I am very independent from my parents, but for the financial aid, they made you submit like a form of how much your parents make. And because of that, like I got less support because they're like, oh, your parents should be supporting you. So that's something that some medical schools do, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. So I would just lower your expectations and go in with the assumption that you're going to be taking out loans if you can't afford it.
It is very common practice for schools to ask for parental information, even for people who are completely financially independent of their families. Like students under the age of 40, essentially, typically will be asked to provide that kind of info. And of course, you know, different schools have their own individual processes. Alice, do you want to talk a little bit about like uniform services and kind of the way that financial stuff works for students there?
Yeah, absolutely. I put a little bit about it in the chat, and there is so much that is unique to the military medical school that I could go on for a really long time. So I did put my phone number in the chat and somewhere. So if anybody has more specific questions, I don't want to bog down the time of the session here. Feel free to reach out to me. As far as the financial side of things, we as students are active duty officers. So we go through the whole, military officer training for whatever branch that you end up in. And we get paid as officers, which is a really, really good pay. It's definitely more than enough for me at this stage. So we don't owe any money for school. We get all of our books and supplies like stethoscopes and all that kind of stuff. And then we also get paid like a housing stipend, and it's based on where you live. So I live in Bethesda, Maryland, which is where the school is. And because it's a very expensive area around DC, our stipend is a lot higher. And we also get a food stipend as well. So it ends up being very, very good. Now, while I don't have financial debt at the end of med school, I do have time and service debt. So that is definitely a very big thing to consider going into this. It is 7 years for the primary branches, so Air Force, Army, Navy, after residency. So depending on how long your residency is, it ends up being a pretty long time commitment. If military medicine is something you really want to do, which I do, it is kind of like, whatever. I was going to stay in for a full 20 years anyways. So definitely something to think about. It is a very, very good perk to get paid so well as a med student, and then also to get paid pretty well as a resident. So.
Awesome. And you get to hear earlier, right? Alice, you're going to hear your residency match next month?
Yeah, December 11th. So yeah, our whole
Yay!
match system's different too. So again, I'm happy to talk about that offline.
Awesome. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna ask a last question. It looks like a lot of the other questions have gotten answers via text. Thank you all panelists for contributing there. But I think this is actually kind of a good conceptual question to end on. What was it that made you decide you wanted to work as a physician in particular? And for Carolina as a physician scientist, how did you know this profession versus another health profession was the right fit for you?
I guess.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You go first and then I'll go.
Yeah, so my story is not going to apply to everyone since I mainly come from a research background. So I was really interested in biology and basic science from a very young age. And it wasn't until the COVID pandemic that I really saw how important the interplay between science and medicine is. It was incredible to watch how like scientists communicate with physicians. And I thought to myself that, if I can play a part of that incredible sort of interplay between these two disciplines, that would be ideal. And medicine is also very humanistic. I've always considered myself to be a people person. I love helping people. I mean, it's cliche to say, but like, you love science, you love helping people, medicine, right? But yeah, that's what got me interested in doing an MD PhD in particular. So.
Michaela, were you going to go?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think one of the best ways is to actually like shadow other professions, not just doctors, like shadow some PAs, like shadow NPs, like figure out what they do and then kind of make the decision after that. I think that's the best way to kind of figure out exactly what you want to do.
Yeah, to echo that, I think it's really important to learn what you don't like doing and then use that to narrow down. I remember all of college, I was waiting for this like career panel to happen. I think when I envisioned college, I'm like, there must be a time where you go into a room and people from every single career tell you about their career. And then I realized that just never happened. So I think you need to seek out the opportunities. Like if you're debating, oh, is PA the right move for me instead of MD? Like there are huge perks of that. There's no residency, like schooling shorter. You should definitely reach out to someone, shadow them. One of my best friend from college, from Barnard, is a PA. So it was really interesting talking to her to see why she chose that career. But yeah, ask people what their day-to-day is so you can get a sense.
I think a big part of being a physician is being a leader. And that's a role that you definitely need to be comfortable in and interested in, whether it's, leading a code stroke or leading in the OR. Of course, being a good leader is also being a good follower, but just knowing that that is part and parcel of the role of a physician.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think like I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted my life to look like. Like what did I want my like work hours to look like? How did I want to be able to balance things? And what kind of work is most fulfilling to me? And what I like about medicine, particularly kind of like more academic medicine, is that there can be a balance between times that you're on service and time like actively in the hospital seeing patients and times that you're doing education or times you're doing other things. And while you can do that in other, if you're like an NP or a PA or a nurse, it's a bit of a different path. Whereas for doctors, it can be really baked in. And that was something that was really exciting to me when I thought about what I wanted my future to look like. That was part of it too.
Awesome. I think we're hitting 7 o'clock. So I want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's wonderful to see you all. It's wonderful to see you all thriving, and especially those of you who are applying for residencies and getting ready for the next stage. I totally agree with what Yael said earlier. Like, don't always be thinking about the next step, right? Like this time is an important time. Those of you who are still in college, like this is it's a time you don't get back, and your journey through medical school and residency and everything else that you do is also unique and wonderful and is going to come with its own challenges and joys and all of that stuff. But we appreciate, I speaking on behalf of Beyond Barnard, we so much appreciate having fantastic alums who are willing to give of their time and to share with current students. We love you all so much, and we hope that everybody makes it through the holidays and gets at least a little bit of a rest time. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night, everybody.